So what I'm going to do here is, first, I'm just going to give a brief overview, a presentation of what this project is. There's hundreds, much more than hundreds, thousands of chumashim, of different iterations or different versions of chumash, as I guess you would say is the 5 books of Moses, called the Chumash with commentary. You can just look at these shelves and you'll probably see a dozen different versions of that. Here I see the Da'at Mikra, which is a fascinating academic analysis with a commentary, and I see Mikra Gdolot with the traditional multi-commentary. We'll have the classical commentaries like Rashi and Ramban and Even Ezra and Orach Chaim and so on. And you know, if any of you guys want to come, are invited to visit me in my study, and you'll see probably 50 or 60 more different types of chumash. And so the first question that you can obviously ask is, who needs another chumash? Like, there's so many different options out there. I'm sure you go to your shul, there might be, so, you know, there's of course, there's the famous Eretz chumash that was for many years was the standard chumash, and you have the Art Scroll chumash, and then you have different Chabad chumashim, and you have many different chumashim. So what are we trying to do here that's new? So first of all, it doesn't have to be new. Jews are always writing and learning, and there's always more to learn. There's always another one to make, another angle, another thing. So you don't really have to justify why make another chumash. There's new chumashim coming out all the time. The one thing, one particular aspect that I'm trying to do here, that maybe if someone will point out to me, someone who's done it already, I have no objection to that. But I personally have not found it yet. Is, as a rule, if you take a chumash off the shelf, it's presenting to you a certain angle on Torah, a certain approach, whether it's the Hasidic approach or the Kabbalistic approach or a more modernistic approach or a philosophical approach or a Kabbalistic approach. You can have all different, but what the beautiful thing about Torah is a very famous statement by the sages, Shivim Panim LaTorah. There are 70 faces to the Torah. And this statement, there are 70 faces to the Torah, is actually an understatement, because there are many more than 70 faces to the Torah. So in this book itself, we have close to 600 faces, 600 different perspectives and angles, and different people who lived in different places and had different views and came from completely different approaches. And ultimately, we're working now, as I said, on the full 5 chumashim, and there are going to be at least 1,000 different sources. And when I say different sources, it's not just different people, but each one is bringing their own unique vision and perspective of Torah. And that's what the beauty of Judaism is. It's not a monolithic approach to life. You can talk to 2 Jews and each one will be very passionately arguing with you that this is what the authentic Judaism is. And they're both bringing you source texts and proofs and everything. And they're saying 2 completely different approaches, wildly different approaches. So who's right? Like the famous line I'm sure you all know from Tevye, you're both right. How could both be right? You're also right. That is what the beauty of Judaism is. Elu ve'elu divrei Hakim Chayim. The Talmud says that when you had 2 different sages giving 2 different interpretations, the famous Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel, right? They didn't just argue. You know, some people think the arguments of Bet Shammai is in the minutiae, in the little things. You know, you open up Masechet Brachot, and it says over there that Bet Shammai says, Bet Hillel says first you make Kiddush, and then you wash for bread, and Bet Shammai says first you wash for bread, and then you make Kiddush. So we all know, right? Everyone knows what we do. We follow Bet Hillel, so we make Kiddush first, then we wash for bread. And if we would wash for bread first, and then make Kiddush, but the same Bet Shammai, Bet Hillel also argue, what was created first, the heavens and earth? Which is a very fundamental question. Like, what is the creation all about? Is it about spirituality? Is our purpose in life to become more spiritual? Or is our purpose in life to bring spirituality down into the material realm. And you can take your choice of all the different philosophies and all the different religions of the world and all the different ways and approaches to doing things. You'll find a legitimate source for almost everyone in Judaism. So what are Jews? Are we schizophrenic? In a way we are. But the amazing thing is that from all these opposing and even opposite approaches to life, we end up with a very cohesive system. You'll always recognize something as Jewish. At the end of the day, is the Jewish way. There's the Jewish way, and the Jewish way is not spiritual or materialistic, and it's not, introverted or extroverted. It's all these different things. Talking about the Chayei, there's even an argument between them. Would a person be better off if he was born or not born? I mean, what could be more fundamental question that you have? The nihilistic approach that we would be better off if the world was never existed, and then you have the positivist approach that says, no, everything we're doing has significance and has meaning. And how do we incorporate both these things? At the end of the day, life and reality, if you're looking at things just purely from an intellectual standpoint, you're looking at it only with your brain, so then life is basically binary. It's either yes or no. The answer to each question is either A or B. It can be A and B at the same time. But life and experience and spirituality is so much more than just this binary tool of the intellect, which is very important and very necessary. We cannot navigate life without this tool. But at the same time, we have to know that we need to be informed by all these different perspectives. So we have a history of more than 3,000 years, almost 4,000 years, of Jews studying Torah, taking this one book, okay? You take the Chumash. The Chumash is 85,000 words. That's about the size of a small novel. It's one book. And then we have thousands and thousands of books and hundreds of different schools of thought and philosophies, whether it's capitalism or communism, and whether anything in between. They're all basing themselves on this one book, on this one text. Okay, you have Avram and Sarah, and then there was Hagar, and then there was Yishmael, and then there was Yitzhak, and suddenly the Joseph and his brothers, and suddenly the dynamics between them suddenly becomes the foundation of entire schools of psychology, entire schools of philosophy, entire shelves and shelves of halachic works that are guiding us through every single act in our lives and everything in our day, all based on this one book. Because everything, there's a electronic library called Otzar HaChachma. I don't know if any of you have it or use it. It's a very useful tool. I use it all the time. It has over 200,000 books scanned into it, Torah books. 200,000 Torah books. It first came out about 20 years ago and it had like 50,000, and every edition that came out had another tens of thousands more, and today they're past 200,000. And that's not even all the books that Jews produced through the ages. But every single thing in those books, every single page in those hundreds of thousands of books is either based on a verse in the Torah, or based on a statement in the Talmud which is based on a verse in the Torah, or based in a statement in one of the later works that is based on a statement in the Talmud is based on a statement in the Torah. You can always trace it back, and that's what we're doing here with this book. We're showing you all these different perspectives, but we're putting them in their native context, which is as a commentary on the Torah. Because the whole of Judaism, the whole of Jewish life, the whole of Jewish culture is basically a commentary on Torah. Because that's its inspiration, that's where it's coming from. Okay? So I'm just going to click through this quickly. This is a presentation that we made that basically presents this book. I'm just going to click through it quickly. I'm not going to explain anything. You can see it on yourself. Maybe I'll add a word of explanation too. But what I really want to do is I want to launch into an actual study of one page in the book. because I don't want to just talk about what we're doing, but I want you guys to actually experience. So I'm just going to go through this quickly. I don't want to spend too much time on it. Why am I not getting okay. This is the Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal. Okay, and now we're talking about what people today are looking for in Torah. So there's one thing that people want to learn, but they don't want to be patronized. And this is a very important element of this book. We don't want to preach. We don't want to spoon feed. We don't want to tell you what the text means. We want you to read the text and engage with it. We want it to be a dialogue. Reading and learning should not be a passive experience where, like a teacher standing in front of the room and frontal learning. You know, there's a study made that shows that when there's frontal teaching, when a teacher just stands in front of the room and teaches to the students, a month later, they remember maybe 5% of it. This is an actual scientific study. And when there's an actual debate and a discussion and a dialogue, that goes up to 50%. So we want your experience of the book to be a dialogue. We don't want it to be a passive kind of thing. Okay, tell me what the truth is. Tell me what this means. Tell me what it's about. We want to present the actual source texts, the way they are, in all these thousands of works, and you read it, and you decide for yourself. We'll give you a few different directions. Maybe it means this, maybe it means that. But ultimately, it's the reader that decides the significance of what it means for them. Okay, we want to own and personalize our knowledge. So we want to give an authentic Torah learning experience. All too often, you know, people, a lot, including educators and writers, sometimes confuse ignorance with stupidity. Ignorance and stupidity are two different things. Ignorance could be a person who just doesn't know about it. They never had the opportunity. They didn't learn Hebrew, or they never they never had an opportunity to learn Torah, and now they're just starting to learn Torah. So you need to be taught. You need to provide the information. But just because you're translating a Hebrew text into English doesn't mean that the text has to come down to a 4th grade level, right? And that's many times that's what happens. And it's for good intentions. I think, oh, this person needs help. This person needs to be explained what we're saying. But when you're doing that, you're taking away the experience. You're turning it into a passive learning experience. So we want this to be an authentic Torah learning experience. This is our first volume. This is a sample page, which you also have in front of you from a different parasha. This is Parashat Workshop. This is the first page of Chayei, which is this week's parasha. You see the different components here. This is the text itself. This is the commentary. This is another layer of commentary. This is, I'm going to explain what these two layers of commentary are in a minute. And this is the illustrations that we have, okay? And these are the different key features. So the first thing is the translation is a foundational translation, which means we're trying to mirror the Hebrew as much as possible. So when you're learning Chumash, for example, and you can read a certain verse in Chumash, and Rashi understands it this way, and the Ramban interprets it this way, and the Ibn Ezra interprets it a third way, and then you read some Hasidic discourse, and it's giving you a completely different meaning to it, a more esoteric, mystical meaning. But then you're reading the verse, so if you're reading it in the original Hebrew, you can actually see how all these different meanings are folded into the text. When you're reading an English translation, you usually don't see that, because English translation has to translate either like Rashi, or like Ramban, either like the Zohar, or like the Talmud. So what we're trying to break that paradigm. We're trying to do is to give you a foundational translation that gives you an English word that also has all those different nuances and all those different shades of meaning, so that you can actually see the relationship between the commentary and the text. So that's the foundational translation. It's also broken up line by line. If you in the synagogue and you listen to the reading of the Torah, you notice an actual chant. Now the chant, the trop, the way the Torah is read in the shul, is not only for the music of it, it's also the punctuation. It also tells you how the sentences to be broken up, and sometimes that meaning could be very different based on where you put in the pause, because the Sefer Torah doesn't have commas, right? What are the commas and the periods and the semicolons and the dashes and all those different components? They exist in Hebrew. Actually, it's even more nuanced, because in English you have 6 or 7 different punctuation marks. In Hebrew, in the Torah, you have 30 different degrees of separation and connection. And what we're doing here is we're breaking up the actual text according to the Torah. So when you're reading this, you're not reading it like a linear text, you're reading it more like poetry, and you're getting phrase by phrase the way this traditional Torah lineup is. This is the actual commentary. So on the book of Genesis alone, like I said, we have close to 600 different sources, 4,000 different commentary pieces. Now, each one of these commentary pieces could be read as a thought on its own, but then we also have strings that once you read it through, you can see how each one is building on the other, because they're going sequentially. They're going like through the generations. So you're getting, what the Midrash says, and then what Rashi says, and then what a later says, and then what maybe a Hasidic leader says, and so on. So you're getting all these different things. This is the more technical side. Okay, this is another thing that we did over here. In Torah commentary, you generally have many, many different aspects to it, but in the big picture, you can divide it into 2 areas. And what I call it, what does it mean? A, and what does it mean to me? Those are the 2 areas of commentary. And think about it. When you're opening up a Chumash and you read learning with Rashi or Ramban or Ibn Ezra or Orach Chaim or any of the other dozens and hundreds of different commentaries, sometimes what they're doing is they're trying to figure out, what does this word mean? Because a lot of words in the Torah are obscure. Like, what is this sentence? What happened here? Like a question. Like, why did he say that? Or things like that. And then there's this side of commentary that says, okay, so what does that mean to me? What lesson do I take from this? How do I apply this in my life? Or what does it tell me about how I should view human nature? Or how I should view the Torah, and so on and so forth. So, and they're both equally important, because the second is based on the first. Unless you analyze the word, sometimes someone will say, okay, I want a shortcut. Let me go straight to the meaning. Why do I have to bother with grappling with the text itself? But it's a very different experience when you're finding those contradictions or those obscure passages, and then you finally resolve what's going on over here. Then the meaning becomes so much more meaningful. But in order to make the process easier for the reader, we've sort of separated out these 2 elements. So over here you get a very concise. If you want to look on your page, you can also see the shaded box. You can see where you're going to have, in just a few words, Kiryas Arba. What does the word Kiryas Arba mean? You have 5, 7, or 8 different interpretations with all the sources, who says what. But in a very concise way of documenting all the different meanings, because there's no single word in Torah doesn't have dozens of meanings to it. So just documenting all the different meanings, okay? And then here, in the main commentary, and you can pull this book off the shelf. It depends what you're in the mood of now. Are you in a more scholastic mood now? You want to now get into the analytics of it? Or do you just want a nice vert to say over at the Shabbos table? So, or you can do both. Then everything will be much more meaningful. But here, when you're dealing with this part of the text, you can just take any one of these sections and read it, and it's a fully contained idea of its own. But then you can read them in sequence, and then you can see how together they create a whole speech, a whole essay. So those are these 2 areas. Okay. Then we have a few more components. We have from the Midrash. In the end of each parsha, we have an entire section bringing the Midrashic component, which is adds a whole new layer, sort of fills in the gaps in the story, and brings a lot of very exotic, interesting things. But they're usually too long to fit into the structure of the regular commentary. So we put that at the end of each parsha, called From the Midrash. We also have an introduction and overview to each parsha, which once you read the whole parsha and all the different commentaries, you get sort of an overview. And it's intentionally kept separate because, like I said, I don't want to impose any meaning on the text for the reader. I want the reader to read these source texts, which are all direct translations or direct paraphrases sometimes when it's very long, but no editorializing, no giving any spins, just giving you the source text as it is. Then if you want my take on it, or you want to see the more mystical interpretation of it, you can read the overview, which is offering you just one of many, many different ways of connecting all this information. So that's the overview in the beginning of the Parsha. This is also essays we have in the back with a more Kabbalistic thing. We have all these very complex infographics that sometimes take very, very complex ideas and make them more presentable. We don't have an infographic like that on these pages here, but we have many of them in the book. And when it's completed, like I said, it's going to have 100 different sources. Here's just a small sampling of the different kind of sources we have. This is like more the different styles. You're not getting all 1,000 here, but you're getting, you see Talmud, you see Zohar, you see Torah, which is a halachic work. You see what's called Lithuanian works like Meshech Chochma, and then you have the Rebbe, of course. You have Maimonides, you have Tanchuma, you have Noam Elimelech. You have all different, very, very different variety, cross section of all different things in Torah. This is our coming 5 books that are being created right now. The book of including the Exodus and so on. These are the covers are already all designed and ready to go. We just have to fill in between the covers. And this is an online digital version that we're also planning to make of the book. Okay, so, all right, let's launch in because we took up a lot of time with the about. Let's spend some time on the what, okay? So, what we're going to do is we're going to read a pasuk. We'll read some of the commentary on the pasuk. I'll give you the background of who these people are. You might know them. Some of them you might even know. Some you might not be so familiar with who they are. When you understand where these sources are coming from, you get a deeper appreciation of what they said also, by the way. So, this is the opening verse of this week's Parsha, which is Chayei, which is called, the name of the verse is The Life of Sarah, the name of the Parsha, even though interestingly enough, the entire Parsha happens after Sarah's passing, but it's still called The Life of Sarah. Why is that? For that you have to read the introduction, the overview. Once you get the book, it's a whole long explanation about how actually this Parsha and the different components of this Parsha are actually emphasizing the life of Sarah even more than the events that we read about that happened in her lifetime. But anyway, just to read quickly the verse, Vayir Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah was Ve'eshana, Ve'esrim Shana, Ve'sheva Shana, 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. Shnei Chayei Sarah, the years of the life of Sarah. A lot of repetition here. The life of Sarah was, the years of the life of Sarah, concluding. It doesn't just say 127 years, it says 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. It's a very precise translation of how the text actually appears in the Hebrew. Then it says, Vatama Sarah, Sarah died, Bekias Arba hi Hebron be'eretz Canaan, in Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Vayavai Avram, and Avram came, Lispar l'Sarah l'Ivkaisa, to eulogize Sarah and to weep for her. I'll just mention in passing, we're not going to be covering it now. For example, just these 2 words, Vayavai Avram, Avram came, raises a huge discussion going on for dozens of pages in the commentaries. Where's he coming from? What does it mean he came? Where's he coming from? Where was he? Weren't they living in Hebron? As a matter of fact, they were not living in Hebron. They were living in Beersheba. Because the previous Parsha ends off, Vayeshev Avram be'Beersheba, right after the Akedah, after the binding of Isaac, as we're going to see, which is the one event that happens directly before this event. It says Avram settled in Beersheba. So how, if Avram is in Beersheba, why is Sarah in Hebron? And why is Sarah dying in Hebron? And where is Avram coming from? So we have a whole long discussion. This is one of the appendices in the back of the book that touches on this question and deals with it. So what I would like to do, I'd like to start with the second pasuk, and then if we have time, we'll dive into the first pasuk too. If not, you guys, you have the pages, you can read it yourself. It's all here. But it says here, and Sarah died, and this event is coming in continuation for something. Especially you have the and. I mean, most biblical verses start with the word and, but it doesn't stop the commentaries from asking what this and is about. What is the connection with the previous event? Because the fact that the Torah places 2 events next to each other always means there's a connection, which is a fascinating idea. This is a very basic rule in all. This is something that all the different Torah commentators agree with. That when you have in the Torah, sometimes, many times, as a matter of fact, you're going to have events in the Torah that are not listed in chronological order. You have at the end of Parshas Noach, which was read a few years ago, says, Vayomas Terach v'charan, Terach died in Charan. But if you're going to go and look at the numbers, make the calculations, because the Torah tells us how long Terach lived, and how old Terach was when Avram was born, and how old Avram was born when Yitzchak was, how old Avram was when Yitzchak was born, you'll find out that Terach actually died 100 years later. So why is the Torah here saying Terach died? There's a connection. There's a logical, there's a thematic connection between events. The Torah often prefers the chronology of meaning over the chronology of time. So that's why it'll take certain events that are not connected in time. So the same thing is here when we're talking about the death of Sarah. What is the event that's two events? If you turn back the page, which we don't have here, but you go to the end of Parshas Vayera, there's two major events that end off in Vayera. One is the Akedah, the binding of Yitzchak, the famous narrative where God commands Avram to bring up his son Yitzchak as a sacrifice, and then he stops him in the very last minute. And then right after that we have the birth of Rivka, is recorded. And right after that we have the death of Sarah. So immediately all the commentaries say these three events are interconnected with each other. Now there's, interestingly enough, there could be differences of opinion. There's a lot of difference of opinion between the commentaries of whether these three events actually happened at the same time. For example, Rashi's approach is that all three events, the binding of Yitzchak, the birth of Rivka, and the passing of Sarah, all happened literally simultaneously. While Yitzchak was being bound on the altar, Rivka was born and Sarah died. It all happened the same moment. Rashi says that based on a midrash. But not everyone agrees with that. There are other commentaries that make different calculations using other sources in the text as proof. Some place these two events 14 years apart. But the interesting thing is they all agree that they're connected. Whether it actually happened at the same time simultaneously in the literal sense or not, these three events are bound with each other. So let's read a text from the Midrash Rabbah. I'm sure you all know what the Midrash Rabbah is. Midrash Rabbah is a famous collection of midrashim on the Torah. It was composed around the 3rd century, and it includes quotes from dozens of different of sages that lived in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel, approximately in the 3rd and 4th century of the Common Era, which is about 1800 years ago. So it is written, and the sun rises and the sun sets. This is a quote from Koheles, Ecclesiastes, for English readers. And it says, the sun rises, the sun sets. This means that before God retires the soul of one tzaddik, he brings forth the soul of another tzaddik. So there's no gap. Okay? If each generation has to have its tzaddik, its righteous person, that the entire generation is the linchpin of that generation. And before one dies, the new one is born. God did not set the son of Sarah until he made rise the son of Rivka. So Rivka's birth happens at the time of Sarah's death. This is the next matriarch, and those of you who were in the previous class know that in Judaism the mother is much more significant than the father. The Judaism of the child is determined by the mother. It's a more of a matriarchal religion than a patriarchal religion, even though it's both. It has elements of both to it. But the very identity is based on the mother. The mother is the one that creates the home, that sets the tone, creates the family, which is considered way more significant than the communal or ritualistic dimension of Judaism. And therefore the handing over the torch from one generation to the other goes from Sarah to Rivka. So interestingly, with Avram and Yitzchak, you have more of an overlap. You have like 75 years of overlap. Yitzchak is born 75 years before Avram dies. But with Sarah and Rivka, you see a very much more dynamic kind of link that Rivka is actually born the day that Sarah dies. So that's one explanation of this event over here. But then we have another opinion in Midrash Rabbah, which is brought by Rashi, which is telling us that the significance of this event is actually tied to something else. The death of Sarah, I'm reading the next piece now, the death of Sarah is juxtaposed to the binding of Yitzchak as it resulted from that event. Sarah actually died as a result of the binding of Yitzchak. So Yitzchak's life was saved the very last minute, very dramatically. He's lying there on the altar, all bound up. Avraham lifts up the knife, and then the angel comes forth from the heaven and stops him at the very last minute. But it wasn't the victim described. Sarah actually died as a result of that event. Sarah's life was sacrificed as a result of this event. And how did this happen? When Sarah received the news of how her son was prepared for the slaughter and almost slaughtered, her soul flew from her and she died. So now I'm not going to go into this because of time constraints, but we have a very lengthy footnote here, and one of the purpose of the footnotes here, sometimes we elaborate more on subjects that are that just for space reasons we don't want to go into too much in the commentary itself. What exactly does this mean? Because this is a very precise translation of the words of the Midrash and the words of Rashi. When Sarah received the news of how her son was prepared for slaughter and almost slaughtered, her soul flew from her and she died. Did she die out of shock from the fact that Avraham is prepared to slaughter his son that they waited 100 years for? Okay, that's one take on it. Another take of it is that it was the joy when she learned that he was actually not slaughtered. Did she actually find out that he wasn't slaughtered? What happened here? Okay? Or was it a combination of the two, that emotional pull in the two directions that our heart could not tolerate? But the bottom line is, there's actually more opinions, but we're not going to go into that now. But what we do know is that Sarah's death was the result of the binding of Yitzchak. So now the next stage we're going to go, the next piece is from Rabbi Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik of Brisk. The Brisk, known as the Brisker Rav. He actually lived, he was born in 1886, he passed away in 1959. It's a more recent source, someone who lived close to our time. Some of the older people might remember him. Anyone here was alive in 1959? Maybe not. But anyway, and he was known as the Brisker Rav, and he's a very, very famous, I would say you can call him representative of what people might call the Misnagdic view of Judaism, or the Lithuanian, Litvish view of Judaism, and he was definitely the prototypical Litvish Gadol, Rabbi Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik. And he's approaching this with a very Talmudic mind. He has a question. He says, what's going on over here? Avram and Sarah are both righteous people. Very righteous people. Both great tzaddikim. They both are ultimate role models. Every Jew is Ben Avram. Every Jewish woman is Bat Sarah, right? And these are the two first Jews. What more prototypical, what more source do we have than these two Jews? Why these two radically different reactions? God comes and commands Avram to sacrifice his son, and Avram rushes to do it, right? It says, this is our greatest chus. Avram, without hesitating, without thinking, he's waking up early in the morning, he takes his child, and even when God is trying to stop him, he's like, what? You really don't want me to do this? Like, what's going on over here? He's running to do it. Sarah has a complete opposite reaction to the same event, okay? Not only is she not running to do it, the mere news, the mere information that this is what Avram was ready to do, he didn't even do it. He was prepared to do it. Killed her. What's going on over here? Why these two radically different reactions? So this same question we're going to have 4 different answers to. Okay? And the first one is a very Talmudic answer. Very technical, but genius answer. Let's see what Rabbi Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik says. The Brisker Rav. God does not put a person to a test unless that person is given the capacity to meet it. Every person has a different life. Every person has a different mission. Every person has different tests. Every person has different difficulties. People always say when something bad happens to them, why me? Right? That's the big question. Why me? Why that other person? Why is he doesn't have it? That other person has his problems. You don't know the problems of that person. You know your problems. You know the challenges that God gave you, and every challenge that God gives you is tailor-made for you. You are given this challenge because God knows that you have the capacity to meet it, and you have the capacity to come out stronger from it and to be a better person because of it. That's why he gave you this challenge. But that's why he did not give it to a different person, because a different person has a different life, different mission, different way of doing things. Avram was commanded to do this, not Sarah. Why? Why did God not appear to Sarah and tell her sacrifice her child? Because God knew that's not Sarah. That's not her test. This was Avram's test. So because it was Avram's test, he had the capacity to meet it. It was not Sarah's test. And as the Midrash says, the Satan was the one who came to Sarah and told her about it. She was completely unequipped to deal with this because it wasn't her test. If it would have been her test, she would have had the ability to deal with it. Let's see what he writes over here. God does not put a person to a test unless the person is also given the capacity to meet it. The binding of Yitzchak was Avram's test. And Avram, in fact, proved capable of suppressing his love for his son to carry out the divine will. But God did not command Sarah to slaughter her only child, and this was indeed beyond her capacity to bear. Okay? Like a very incisive, philosophical, Talmudic answer. It's like, it's two different cases, and that's why God was commanded Avram and not Sarah. Okay, now we have another.
Are we taking questions on that or no?
Yeah, once we finish,
Okay.
Because I want to get through the end of this, because the fascinating thing is to have the different. So the second piece is from Reb Kalonimus of Piasesna. I don't know if anyone heard about the Piasesna, the Eish Kodesh. Fascinating figure. He will give you a short overview of his life because this is very significant. He was born in 1889. He was a Hasidic Rebbe in a town near Warsaw called Piasesna. And then during the Holocaust, he was in the Warsaw Ghetto. And he had an underground shul in the Warsaw Ghetto. A hidden shul. The Nazis did not allow Jews to get together for prayer. And he would, every Shabbos, he would speak to his people and give them courage, and he would also argue with God. He was an unbelievable figure in the Warsaw Ghetto. And he had his own life was terribly tragic. He had an only son and an only daughter. His only daughter was killed at the beginning of the war from the Nazi bombing of Warsaw. His only son was deported to Treblinka when he was in the Warsaw Ghetto. He was left completely alone. And he would still, every Shabbos, speak to his people and give them courage. And then when the Warsaw Ghetto was liquidated, he was transferred to a different concentration camp, and he died in 1943 in a concentration camp. Fast forward 15 years after the war, in 1960, there are construction workers digging through the still existing rubble of the Warsaw Ghetto. They find a large metal canister buried in the rubble. They open up the canister, they see it's full of papers. Sheets and sheets, hundreds of sheets of papers inside this canister, all in Hebrew, which they of course couldn't understand. But there was a note in there written in Hebrew, Yiddish, and Polish. And the Hebrew says, if anyone finds this, please send it to my brother, and the address is in Israel. They sent it to him. This is the brother of the Piasesna Rebbe. He had written down all his speeches, all his sermons that he gave in the Warsaw Ghetto. The book was printed. It's known as Eish Kodesh. And this is a quote from that book. And listen to what he's writing. Perhaps Sarah allowed herself to be overcome by the binding of Yitzchak for the sake of her descendants. He disagrees with the Brisker Rav. She could have handled it. Her heart was going to burst when she hears about this, but she was holy enough and great enough to be able to have contained that and handled it and suppressed her overwhelming emotions and survived the news. But she chose not to. It was a conscious decision on her part to let herself get so carried away by what she was hearing that it should kill her. Why did she do this? for the sake of her descendants, as her way of saying to God. It was an act of protest to God. She's saying to God, we cannot survive the pain and suffering with which we have been tested. Indeed, we see, and he's talking about his own experience, he's talking about the people that he's meeting every day in the Warsaw Ghetto. Indeed, we see how even those who by God's mercies do survive the horrors of exile are broken in body, mind, and spirit. They remain half dead. It's talking about survivors. And what difference is there really between being murdered entirely and being murdered in part? There's a saying in the Talmud, Malikot l'kula, Malikot l'palga. What's the difference if you kill someone halfway, you kill someone completely? It's the same act of murder. So this is his take on what happened here. Now let's do two more quickly. One is from the Rebbe. I'm sure I don't need to introduce him to you. If I do, then Rabbi Willem isn't doing his job. The Rebbe gives another explanation of these two very different tracks of Avram and Sarah. Avram exemplified the soul's quest to bond with God. We mentioned before, this Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. What is the purpose of life? Is the purpose of life to become more spiritual? To fully express the spiritual potential of your soul? Or is the purpose of your life to engage with and perfect and improve the material world? Two very different views of life. The first view is trying to escape reality. It's trying to reject the coarseness of the material world and to create a spiritual haven, a spiritual sanctuary, a holy place that's disconnected from materialism. And the other approach is no, it's all about improving the material world. And this is Avram and Sarah. Avram represents, there's another piece over here from Zohar, a fascinating piece. We probably won't get to it, but you can read it yourself, where the Zohar says Avram represents the soul, Sarah represents the body. And these are two equally important components of our existence. The soul is not more important than the body is not more important than the soul. But anyway, so Avram exemplified the soul's quest to bond with God, while Sarah exemplified the quest of the body to make godliness real within the physical world. So this explains why Avram went joyously to sacrifice his son as God's behest, whereas for Sarah the prospect was utterly devastating. Sarah is about material living. To Sarah, Judaism means living here in this world and perfecting the world. To say to sacrifice yourself for God, it goes against everything of what Judaism is supposed to be. To Avram, that's the epitome, because it's all about the soul's elevation. It's not about physical life. So this explains the radically different reactions to the same event and why, and this really connects, because when we're seeing different perspectives here, they're really all different sides of the same story. It's similar to what the Brisker Rav is saying, that this is Avram's mission, this is Sarah's mission. But here the Rebbe is giving it a more full expression of what we're talking about. Are we talking about the avodah, the service of the soul, or are we talking about the service of the body? Finally, one more piece is from Menachem Mendel Tauber of Kalev. The Kalev Rebbe is another Holocaust survivor. The Piaseczna was unfortunately not a survivor. The Kalev Rebbe, just to give you a quick story of his life, he was born in 1923, which means at the time of the Holocaust he was in his early 20s. He was already married. Both him and his wife were deported to Auschwitz. In Auschwitz, he was the subject of Mengele's horrific experiments, which left him sterile. He was not able to have children because of that. And he devoted his life. He survived the war. Him and his wife both survived the war. And he devoted his life. He created a museum of the Holocaust in Israel. And he devoted his life to teaching Jews about the Holocaust. But he had a completely different take on the Holocaust. He saw the Holocaust as listen, for us to say it is almost obscene. But for someone who actually went through the worst of it, for him to say it is a different story. And he saw it as the most unbelievable act of Kiddush Hashem, the most unbelievable act of Jews demonstrating their loyalty to God. To him, it was the most unbelievable achievement of the Jewish people. It sounds crazy to say it, but that's how he looked at it. And listen to what he writes over here. What does Rashi say? Before we went in Rashi, that when Sarah received the news, her soul flew from her. Okay? Now, the expression that Rashi uses here to describe the passing of Sarah is a very specific description. Parasha nishmasa in Hebrew. her soul flew from her. But the phrase Parcha Nishmasa, which Rashi uses, her soul flew from her, also means her soul flowered. It's another meaning of the same word. Parcha means to fly, also comes from the word perach, flower. Pareach means to fly. It's the same root, fascinatingly enough, but the two completely different meanings. So upon learning how her son, who she had raised to a life of self-sacrifice for God, stretched out his neck on the altar in obedience to God's will, Sarah's soul reached its full bloom and ascended on high, having attained the completion of its mission in this world. So he sees the death of Sarah not as a tragic event. He sees that as the culmination of her life, because especially if you read it in Hasidut and Kabbalah, it talks about why is the yahrzeit of a great tzaddik celebrated? Isn't it a sad event? Because the yahrzeit, the day of passing, represents the fulfillment of a person's mission in the world. Every person has a mission in the world. Some person, the mission is 120 years, and some person, the mission is much, much shorter. But it's not any less important, because every person gets exactly the amount of years of life that they require for their mission. And this was the peak of her life. This was the ultimate, because Yitzchak was her child. She was the one who defended Yitzchak. She was the one who nurtured Yitzchak. Avraham had a more divided loyalty. He had Yitzchak, he also had Yishmael. He was arguing with God. Maybe not only Yitzchak, maybe Yishmael was also part of it. Sarah knew the Jewish people is Yitzchak. Yitzchak was the apple of her eye, and she saw Yitzchak reach this level of perfection that he is prepared to give up his life for God. To her, that was the culmination of her mission in life. Okay, we'll stop over here. Rabbi Willem had a question.
I mean, yeah, but it's, I guess it was just nice how you presented, because then each one has its strength and weakness, and like you said, you get to choose how you want to learn the end, basically. So
there's so many different angles to it.
Right.
So which is your favorite?
You know, my question again about the briskers, it's a very nice idea that everyone has their ability to handle, but he's ignoring he seems to be ignoring the fact
That some people can't handle it.
that Sarah, it wasn't her mission, therefore she couldn't handle it, but it was her mission to be able to handle that her son was also almost offered as a sacrifice. Right? In other words, we don't believe in collateral damage, right? It's not collateral damage.
If you look, by the way, if you look at the Midrash is saying it is an act of Satan. The Satan comes and tells Sarah. We have that in the we said, I told you, we don't have everything in here, but we have in the Midrash, from the Midrash section brings the more full narrative. So it was actually what you would call a terrorist attack. Actually, it was the Satan coming here and intervening here in a way that maybe he wasn't supposed to. I don't know. Maybe that's just a brisk way of looking at it, but this is, by the way, and it's interestingly enough, because you can look at it as a Litvischer kind of art, but this is a theme that the Rebbe would say a lot also, that if God sends a certain challenge to you, that means that you have the kaiches for it, you have the ability to handle it. This is a very fundamental theological view in Judaism that says, the Gemara says it, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mekapeach schar kol beria. God does not give us anything, does not expect from us things that are beyond our capacity. But again, playing devil's advocate, I don't want to use the word devil here in that sense, but the Pisesner Rebbe is saying no. Pisesner Rebbe says there's a time you got to tell God, sorry, you can't handle us anymore, and you shouldn't send any more of this our way. So you have all these views. You have this compilation of views from every single angle. This is just a small taste of that. But it gets so much more diverse. Sometimes we have, when you come to certain fascinating parts of Torah, if you go, for example, to the story of the Tower of Babel, you'll see over there 25 different perspectives of what's going on over here. What are they doing? What are they after? What do they want? What does God want? You have... That is the richness of Torah, of how many different moving parts there are to this puzzle. Any other questions? Yeah.
Is there a consensus on how old Yitzchak was at that Kedah?
No, there's no consensus. According to Rashi and the Midrash, that says that that it happened at the time of Sarah's death. So it's pretty simple math. So Yitzchak was born when Sarah was 90 years old. Sarah died when she was 127, so that means that the Akedah happened when Yitzchak was 37 years old, which is very different than all the paintings.
Right, when he's a baby.
Well, not a baby or a child or a young man, but there's other opinions as well. There's Ibn Ezra brings an opinion that he must have been a child. He must have been 5 years old or so. Others give different ages. There's a whole range of opinions, and they're not just opinions. They're not just fanciful opinions. They're all based on text. They're all doing the calculation of the different verses that seem to imply. Here Rashi is basing it on a verse that seems to imply, one of the big questions, for example, the Zohar asks, if Yitzchak was 37 years old, why is it a test of Avram? It's just as much a test of Yitzchak. Even more a test of Yitzchak. And the Zohar gives a fascinating answer. Avram is chesed. Yitzchak is gvura. For Yitzchak, it's a natural. To have that inner strength, to be willing to sacrifice yourself for God, for Yitzchak, that's fully consistent with his nature. For Avraham, this is the biggest challenge of his life because it's the exact opposite of everything's about it. Avraham couldn't even tolerate the fact that the most evil people in the world, Sodom, is going to be destroyed. So it's a completely different. So that's why it's Avraham's test, because the point, according to the Zohar, the whole point of the Akedah is that you cannot serve God simply because that's my nature. Oh, I'm a nice guy, so I'm gonna turn morality into being nice. And another person's going to say, no, I'm a guy who likes order and structure in life. So I'm going to make the whole Judaism about following every single line in the book, and that's what makes me a holy Jew. It's not about that. It's not about taking your own personal inclinations and projecting that on top of God and saying, this is what God wants from me. It's about doing what God wants from you, not what you think God wants from you. So that was the whole point of the Akedah. Because God didn't want to slaughter Yitzchak. He wouldn't let him do it. According to many Jewish thinkers, the whole point of the Akedah is to demonstrate that God is against human sacrifice. Well, if he's against human sacrifice, let him just say he's against human sacrifice. Well, if he just says against human sacrifice, well, you guys are just wimps, You don't take it the whole way. We're real God people. We sacrifice our children to God. We're the real McCoy. You guys are, you're just taking the easy road. So God wanted to show, no, it's not about that. It's in essence, on a very principled level, God is pro-life, not anti-life. He doesn't want death. He doesn't want us to serve him by being killed. He wants us to serve him by living. But the way to demonstrate that is to command Avram to do it and then tell him, no, don't. Stop him from doing it. Otherwise, it's meaningless. Otherwise, it's just another statement. So whatever, that's one of the many different. Of course, when it comes to the Akedah, there's so many different perspectives on it about what does it mean, what's the significance of it, why did it happen, what does it mean that God is testing us, why does God need to test us, God doesn't know already what we're going to do. There's so many different issues over here that if you go back a few pages into Parashas Vayera, you'll see at least 5 or 6 pages of commentary just on this question. But anyway, yeah. Oh, I thought you wanted to ask something. Anyone else?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Avi.
Yeah. What is it actually, how do you explain Shuvim Panama Torah or Ilu Ve'elu Divrei Chaim? Like, how could you have multiple opinions about the same situation that are opposing opinions and they're actually both true? Like you said, the joke in the beginning that they're both true, but like, what is the actual explanation?
Yeah, it is that. That's what life is. Life isn't linear. Life isn't is not binary. Okay. It's, take the question, what's more important, physicality or spirituality? So I can tell you that spirituality is more important than materialism, and I can tell you that living your life in the real world is more important than being spiritual. Both these statements are true. You have to incorporate, I'll give you a classic example. One of the classic differences between, to use Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, because they're always used as an example of the two opinions in Judaism, right? Even though it's much more than two, it's dozens. But one of the main differences is what's more important. And this is a defining factor. You can take many dozens of different disagreements in Beit Shammai and Hillel and all different kinds of details of Jewish law, and you can trace it back to this fundamental question. What's more important, the potential of something or the actuality of it? Very fundamental question. So like, for example, how do you judge yourself? Do you judge yourself by your potential? Like you say, you wake up in the morning and you say, what have I done with my life? I'm a nothing. I didn't get anywhere. Look at my classmate who's now a multi-billionaire. Look at my other classmates who married the most sought-after girl in the world. And what am I? I'm a nothing. I'm a girl. And you start feeling depressed, and you start feeling that you're worthless, right? So you go to your therapist or to your Rebbe. And what does he tell you? Don't look at where you are now. You know what you're capable of. Look at your potential. Look at what you could do if you really wanted to. Cherish that, and then bring it out. Okay? So what's more important, the actual state of affairs or the potential? Okay? When you're looking to hire someone, or you're looking for a partner in life, you're looking for a husband or a wife. What are you looking for? Are you looking for where they are right now, how gorgeous they are now, or how rich they are now, or what they've accomplished right now? Or are you looking at their potential? So a lot of people tell you potential is obviously more important. Okay, now let's flip that other way around. So a person says, okay, I don't got to do anything. I can just lie in bed. I know I'm capable. I know I could write the greatest book ever written. I know I could be the richest person in the world. I know I could save the world. I know I can cure cancer. So I have that potential. So now I can just sit and play computer games all day. What's your potential worth if you're doing nothing with it?
You're throwing it away.
You're throwing it away. So which statement is true? Potential is more important than actuality, or actuality is more important than potential? They're both true. Because if you're going to try to put it into a box and try to say A or B, you're losing half of the picture. If you understand that A is more important than B, and at the same time B is important than A, it might not add up mathematically, but life isn't mathematics. It's about holding both these views in your mind simultaneously and understanding that it's the tension between these two views, each one pulling you in a different direction. That tension itself is where you're excelling. Not in going either to this extreme or to that extreme. It's about the tension between trying to balance both things simultaneously to be truth, and it's an impossible goal because you'll never do it, but it's in the act of making it happen that the real work gets done. So that's why Eilu Ve'el Divrei Chaim, Shimon Panam Torah is such an important principle in Judaism. Sure.
So the idea of the whole Akeda, I mean, I know like throughout history we talk about how that like we always refer to like Rosh Hashanah that
Right.
if we haven't done it, if Avram didn't do it, then we won't be able to have survived. Like we always reference it. So is there an opinion that says that Sarah probably did it for her like other? I mean that she couldn't handle it, or other if she was given the test for her future descendant generation?
Yeah, so here's a classic example of what we're talking about. On the one hand, the Akedah is the defining event of Jewish history, and the Abarbanel very famously says, this is our ultimate capital. And like you say, you have your capital, this is what we stand on when we're facing God. We tell God, look, what our forefather Abraham was prepared to do, okay? That's on the one hand. On the other hand, if that becomes the defining event in Judaism, then Judaism just becomes another, without naming other religions, that their whole thing is about martyrdom. And that's not what we're about. So you need that balance. You need someone that can say, oh, no, I'm not standing for this. This is not supposed to happen. So you need both. Without both, you don't have that balance. You don't have that holy balance that makes Judaism so unique. That it's not about, take any, something, I'll give you a challenge. Take any mitzvah or any principle in Judaism, okay? If you take it all the way to its extreme, you're going to end up with the most messed up approach to life you can possibly imagine. Because it's all about, it's not just about the yes and no, it's about the time, the place. The greatest sin in history was a question of timing. Avram eating from the apple. He would have eaten, it wasn't an apple, whatever it was. He would have waited another 3 hours. It would have been a perfect thing to do. Everything, if you try to do it 5, but you're supposed to be doing it 20, you're going to destroy your life. If you try to do it at 100, where you're supposed to be doing it 20, you're also going to destroy your life. It's all about finding the right balance, the right time, the right place for everything. And in order to do that, we have to have all these truths. And we have to understand that each one of them is a very valid and powerful truth. And we have to live inside that tension. We have to live inside those conflicting truths and be informed by them constantly in our quest to find the right expression of what God wants from us.
There is a reason why is the cup at the Fkuta is smaller?
Yeah, there is. Very good question, and it's dealt with why the chaf is smaller. So I'll give you a few things. Can do this from memory, or I can look it up in the book. Okay, so there's one very interesting thing brought by Marshall. Marshall says, one of the commentaries which we didn't really read yet. It's on this page. You guys can read it when you get home, or before you get home. Is what is this 100 years, 20 years, 7 years, right? Why do we break it up? Could have said Sarah lived 127 years, right? 100 years, 20 years, 7 years. So 100 years, each one of these ages represent a different perfection that Sarah reached. And again, we have here several different takes on it. But the most common one, okay, is what Rashi brings down, okay, is that 100 years is 100 years represents wisdom. That's the perfection of wisdom, because it says the older you get, the wiser you get. So 100 is a round number, 10 times 10, especially in Kabbalah, you have the 10 sfirot. Each one of these 10 sfirot consists of 10. So that's the perfection of wisdom. Okay? 20 is the perfection of beauty. And 7 is the perfection of innocence. And Sarah had all these 3 qualities. We know Sarah was extremely beautiful, right? All the stories about Paro took her and Melech took her because of her beauty. And her beauty obviously reflects an inner beauty. It wasn't just a superficial beauty. And we have that innocence of even having the wisdom of the 100 years. She still retained the purity and innocence of a 7-year-old child. And that she always had, even at a 7-year-old child, she had the wisdom of a 100-year-old sage. Okay? So according to this interpretation, this is one of many. It's an interesting, in fact, if you look in commentary from Hirsch, there's other versions, which is actually the more common version, is that 7 represents beauty and 20 represents innocence, which is a very not modern way of looking at things. I mean, how many innocent 20-year-olds do you know? But it's a very different approach to life that associates the age of 20 as the age of innocence and the age of 7 as the age of beauty. It's a different standard for beauty and it's a different standard for innocence. But that's a separate sideline. But according to this, the chaf represents beauty. So it says when Avram was eulogizing Sarah, her beauty was a lesser consideration for him. He was eulogizing her deeds, her righteousness. Usually when especially a very beautiful person passes away, you talk about the person's beauty. And again, this fits into what we said before about Avram representing the soul and Sarah representing the body. Mm-hmm. Avram, from his perspective, Sarah's greatness was not, that was to him an understatement. He underplayed her beauty, because to him, that wasn't the important thing about her. The important thing about her was her righteousness. So that's why the chaf, representing the 20-year-old Sarah, gets reduced.
Thank you very much.